Everywhere I go, people ask me the same question. They say, "Hey Rabbid Luigi, how do I become as good as you are at the video games?" And I tell them, don't worry about it. That's not very hard, because I am in fact not very good at the video games. In fact, I'm not so sure why you're asking me the question in the first place. No doubt, there are countless more people who are more qualified to answer that question. I just talk a lot. But if you are in need of an easy path to the top, you could do much worse than honing your skills in an arena that won't fight back. A game lives and dies by its boss fights, and so you're left with a particular impression if the game is bold enough to put someone in front of you who literally can't beat you. Not a boss fight that doesn't offer you much of a challenge, I'm talking about bosses where you have zero chance of failing. Because that is a thing that some games do. In a way, it's a difficult thing to rank, because how exactly do you assess fights that you can't possibly lose? Maybe creativity, or what it means within the video game and if it's actually justified? You know, maybe an enemy doing a crap job of fighting you actually makes a decent amount of sense. I don't know, I make this up as I go along anyway. That way, I feel the video is more interesting to watch. Good lord, I need that nowadays. I've accepted at this stage that I probably talk about Star Fox Adventures more often than any one man should, but I played it when I was young and it holds some special memories of struggling to get past certain sections that actually aren't all that difficult. When you spend long enough playing a game and yearning for forward progress, you start imagining how all of this is going to play out in the end. You've got these 4 shiny stones that are going to put the planet back together, and some ghostly spirits that you need to collect to free your foxy girlfriend, and also some big scaly dinosaur man who I guess is the bad guy. I do wonder what that boss fight is going to look like. And yet, in a twist that no one saw coming because it's incredibly stupid, General Scales is actually Andross's puppet, and Mr. Monkey Man has been pulling the strings from the shadows the whole time. He also sounds at least 60% like Arnie, so that's cool, I guess.
Destroy the Lilac system!
I'm okay with Andross stealing the thunder because I've played a Zelda game before, but I just want to bring attention to the fight with General Scales that precedes this. Look at him dance! Have you ever seen something so simultaneously hilarious and disappointing at the same time? The idea is that you attack General Scales immediately, at which point you get a cutscene that results in Scales effectively surrendering to you, but you can also just not attack him and watch this spectacle for a little while. I think I'm disappointed, but I'm honestly not so sure. This might be secretly beautiful. It's like a ballet. In recent years, I've mellowed significantly on Super Mario Galaxy 2. I used to hate how familiar everything was, how reluctant Nintendo were to make radical changes, and how the changes that were made were to the detriment of the video game, like the fat purple Luma. But I have mellowed, like I said. Now I look at this game and see a more arcade style of 3D Mario game with creative level design pushed to the front at the expense of difficulty. Might just be me, but I feel like there's fewer levels in this game that offer up some ridiculous challenge to overcome, apart from the perfect run, obviously. By that logic, I should have seen that final boss coming, but I guess not. If Mario games are stereotypically fairly easy, then the Bowser fights go one step beyond. Do you remember Super Mario Bros? In that game, you just jump over him, you grab the axe, and that's it. Easy win. Bring the next game, I can probably handle that as well. But you can screw it up if you mistime your jump. Very unlikely for this to happen in Super Mario Galaxy 2, because it's quite brainless in that fight. So technically this fight is split up into 2 separate stages because, of course it is, it's the final Bowser fight of a 3D Mario game. You think I was born yesterday? Fair enough with the first form, since it's a souped up version of the regular fight with a few extra features to keep you on your toes, but you are clearly here for the second form, if just because Bowser makes a big show of eating the Grand Star and inflating like a balloon. That's actually a great comparison to make, because what follows this is an action-packed set piece where you're ground-pounding meteors into Bowser's face and you can't die. The worst that Bowser can do is destroy the meteor you're standing on, but it doesn't do any damage to you, so you can ground-pound those rocks unopposed. It's kinda strange to have such an awesome spectacle with dramatic music and also no challenge. That's what Bowser's doing wrong. It's like the fancy suit he had in Odyssey. It's not gonna win you anything. It's important to be able to tell what can and can't be considered a boss fight. The first Goomba in Super Mario Bros? Nah, he's an enemy. The Poe sisters in Ocarina of Time? More of a mini-boss. Staring down a copy of Metal Gear Survive? Not a boss fight, but Godspeed. I only say this because you might think that an element of difficulty is part of what defines a boss fight, but it's all about context. If the game puts you in a room with a flimsy piece of paper and tells you that said paper is a boss fight, who are you to argue? Then again, if you're in control of the Incredible Hulk, most obstacles won't put up much of a fight. That's why the films often put him up against some other giant monster, because how else are you gonna give him a challenge? But a bit of research tells me that there's a villain called the Leader, who is also green and occasionally big, but mostly just has a weird looking head. I bring this up because the Leader appears as the final boss in the 1994 video game, except he's fairly scrawny and you're quite chunky. Were you expecting anything else? You ever wonder what a game would look like and play like if you were the only aggressor in a mostly peaceful world? I do, on a regular basis, but all I imagine is a similar experience to playing as the villain in a game. You wander from location to location, imparting your devious will on the innocent people of the land, after which you cackle yourself to sleep. You don't play the bad guy in Chrono Trigger, and yet you do get to experience a similar level of power fantasy with the Golem Overlord. Beyond the halfway point, you'll find yourself 12,000 years in the past and facing down a scary looking monster. What I like is that at this stage, you're well aware of how the game works and what you need to do to defeat most enemies. So you approach this guy with confidence, but you don't even need it. The Golem Overlord follows the well-worn path of the boss, using the ultimate attack that takes several turns to charge, but then Chrono Trigger veers away at the last second when it makes this horrifying enemy terrified of heights. That's kind of a big deal, since you're fighting a million miles up in the air on this bird fortress, and the upshot is that this unfortunate monster will flee after a certain amount of time because the heights are just too much for him. He also either loses track while counting down or doesn't know what his special attack is because he struggles with that as well. Poor guy, can't perform under pressure. I find the idea of bosses that are reluctant to kill you incredibly interesting because we've been conditioned over time to think that every enemy wants you dead. The concept of a bad guy having such a basic fear like heights is incredibly endearing. I feel like we need more villains with flaws because it makes them somewhat relatable. I'm not really sure how the rest of the world perceives these joke bosses. I could be making this video as a way of showing off various instances where they crop up and put up no resistance, but no one cares because that's not how you do boss fights, son. There's definitely an element of your time being wasted and a potential lack of closure, but I feel like that only applies if you aren't brought along with the joke. Sure, that's a lot harder with some encounters than others, but if you can get to the end of Fable 2 with an open mind, you never know, you might enjoy yourself. Or maybe ending a grueling journey with an underwhelming conclusion isn't the best way to go. So Lucien Fairfax is a straight up asshole in this game. He kills numerous characters in the story, including your family and your dog, all in pursuit of obtaining absolute power, yada yada yada. It doesn't really matter, he's gonna die either way. At the end of Fable 2, you and your party confront and stop Lucien with his ritual well underway, and since you've got more guns pointed at him, the only logical and likely outcome is to shoot him once and kill him. It's a little bit underwhelming, isn't it? The main antagonist of the game who caused you so much trouble, the means by which you'll have your revenge, and it takes one bullet to kill him. But is this actually hilarious? I mean, yeah, it is. I can understand that many people were disappointed by this, but I am a big fan of cutting off a bad guy's speech by shooting him in the face. Oh, and if you take too long, Stephen Fry does it for you.
Oh,
I thought he'd never shut up.
Thank you? I mean, I could have done that, but, you know, you do you, I'll do me. You've got a better chance of getting away with a joke boss fight if it fits the tone of the game, so a serious game like Far Cry, it probably wouldn't work. I feel like the death and destruction would get a little distracting. But what about a game which is significantly more stupid but kind of similar at the same time? That sounds more promising. Of course, Far Cry and Borderlands are worlds apart and don't make for the smoothest of comparisons, but it is interesting to see how both of them manage and ration their comedy. In a way, the overall journey of a Borderlands game kind of loses a lot of significance because everything and everyone is so fun and ridiculous. Which just means that most villains and boss fights don't really rise to the occasion and embrace the lunacy. Handsome Jack does quite well though, as does Professor Nakayama from the Sir Hammerlock's Big Game DLC, but only accidentally. I feel like I've seen something like this in various movies, but if you want me to confront an evil scientist who is gearing up for a climactic showdown with the protagonist, and who goads the player with claims of superior intelligence, I'm gonna need that guy to fall down the stairs to his death. Yes, something like that. I'm glad we could come to this arrangement. You might be looking at this and be justifiably skeptical of Nakayama being classified as a boss fight, but he is the main antagonist of this DLC and he even gets a health bar. If he wants to fall backwards down the stairs instead of fighting me, that's okay. There's a lesson for us all in here somewhere. Picking up on the right kind of game idea that Borderlands 2 uses to justify a boss that can't do a damn thing to you, Undertale is another game that is perfectly set up for all kinds of different styles of boss fights. This becomes incredibly apparent when you go down the pacifist route, where the game revels in showing you the many ways in which you can solve a conflict without violence. It's a positive example that we should all follow. Don't fight back, just pour some water on their head instead. But towards the end of the game, things start getting a lot more serious, and you move past dating skeletons and arrive at trying to stop a very angry god who has transformed from a psychotic flower into a guy who shoots laser beams. To say that this escalated quickly would be a gross understatement. And yet, despite the circumstances, with Azrael Dreamer holding all of your friends hostage and breaking down the walls of reality to leave you desperately clinging to your well-worn bullet-dodging skills, the deciding factor is actually determination. You know, that positive reinforcement that was hammered into your skull over the course of the game? Turns out it's not just limited to frozen spaghetti, it's actually the force that keeps you alive in this fight. Basically, you can't die or lose, but you also can't do any damage to Azrael, so you're just waiting around for events to unfold in such a way that lets you reach the end of this fight. Very different to a lot of other fights on this video, but I still wanted to talk about it because it's the same idea, but used to achieve a completely different effect. You can't lose, but you sure as hell can't win. Not conventionally, at least. Only one boss fight should come to mind when you look at that title. I guess this trope has been around for a little while and different generations will have different impressions, but the poster boy for this particular feature can be found in the wonderfully stupid Earthworm Jim. Suddenly, what I said earlier about needing the right kind of game in order to do this makes a lot of sense, because Earthworm Jim features a humanoid earthworm hybrid in a spacesuit who uses refrigerators to launch cows. You know, like all of those other video games, launching all of those cows. It's a very common occurrence. Earthworm Jim takes similar liberties with its boss fights, which usually aren't particularly complicated, but they sure are weird and wacky and very memorable. The final boss is called Queen Slug for a Butt, for fuck's sake. By that logic, the existence of a fight against a goldfish that you just walk past and defeat should be expected. Bob the Killer Goldfish has been the easiest boss fight in every game he's been in, which just gives me options of which encounter to pick, really. I think I prefer his fight in Earthworm Jim 2, because Jim escalates matters in the sequel by eating the fucking thing. That is the kind of power move that I can get behind. More than just beating a boss, actually consuming him to regain your strength. How embarrassing. Given the choice, and if there's an open invitation to do so, I will jump at the chance to talk about the Spider-Man 2 video game from 2004. I've been playing it recently because we've got a new Spider-Man coming out this year, but it would have to be pretty incredible to overthrow this little gem from 14 years ago. It doesn't take itself super seriously because it's a game starring a superhero who wears red spandex and climbs buildings for fun, and that plays very nicely into the villains. Even though this game takes a lot of its story beats from the movie, there's a fair heaping of original content here, including another villain to contend with. His name is Mysterio. He's a lot of fun. I knew about this fight before playing this game for the first time, but I didn't know it came so far into your journey. Something about the premise of Mysterio rocking up to a convenience store and demanding money from the cashier, because this guy needs money apparently. That is something you'd expect from a tutorial fight or level. I'm sure many people were concerned when Mysterio activated his triple-layered health bar, something that no other boss in the game does, while also threatening you with his great power, but he still goes down in one punch. Mind you, it's a punch that drains his health in an instant, removes his orange helmet, and knocks him on his ass, so don't fuck with Spider-Man! I mean, Spider-Man isn't that strong. This game would be pretty easy if he was. It's just that Quentin Beck, who assumes the alias of Mysterio, is a bit weedy. I guess it was worth a try, though. The joke fights are all well and good, and actually a little more than that really, but I can't help but feel like they could be used differently to achieve something equally impressive. Maybe even more impressive. A lot of games put a fight in front of you which you use to take the boss down, but typically the aftermath, the set of circumstances that actually defeat the enemy, are played out in a cutscene. Some of the only exceptions to this that I can think of are games like God of War and No More Heroes that use QTEs to let you land the killing blow. It might seem like a small thing, but I like being involved. It's very considerate. Final Fantasy VII was doing this way back in 1997, but of course, unlike the remake, that game was a traditional turn-based RPG where the idea of using QuickTime events was completely out of contention, especially since they weren't popularized until Shenmue came out 2 years later. So at the end of a long game where bad guy Supreme Sephiroth kills many people and ascends to the rank of one-winged godman before being struck down, despite the fact that one of his attacks has a 2-minute animation of destroying planets just so he can dump a meteor on your face, you're left with one final separate confrontation with a more normal-looking Sephiroth. Minus the shirt, of course, it was the source of his power. The fight that you're left with is devoid of challenge but full of significance. Cloud confronts a spiritual version of Sephiroth in this wispy ethereal world, with the player somewhat limited for what they can do here. The idea is to strike Sephiroth down once and for all, which for this battle has been made a cast iron guarantee due to Sephiroth having 1 HP and 0 in every other stat apart from dexterity. You can use any attack to finish him, but the game gives you Omni Slash if you didn't have it before, so I think maybe use that. There's no way to not kill Sephiroth inside one turn since his attacks won't do enough damage to Cloud and you'll counterattack them anyway, so the writing's on the wall. Not even Action Replay can save him. That is some mighty powerful resolve. This thing happened to Luigi, and it might seem like using a powerful attack like Omni Slash on someone who has 1 HP is some massive overkill, and it is, but it's more there for the satisfaction it brings. You can't lose this battle, but you sure as hell can relish in an overwhelming victory that ensures that there's no possible way that Sephiroth is coming back from that. At least until Crisis Core, and that stupid movie.